This is RJ. Just did the talk on moral design here at South by Southwest. It was great. It was a lot of fun, but a bunch of people have been asking for the slides or if the presentation is going to be online. South by Southwest recorded it, and I think that they said at least the audio version will be available. It's going to happen with the video. So I thought I would just do a quick recording of it, run through it now before I go back to being at South by Southwest, since it's all fresh in my mind. So here it is. Going to go right through it. Hope to keep this around in half an hour, 45 minutes. And just before I start, I want to say thank you so much to everybody who's previewed this ahead of time and everybody who's been interested in this topic. It is so great to hear how many people think that this is important and really care about this. And yeah, I just really enjoyed being able to do this. So thanks a lot. All right, here we go. So I started off by asking everyone who here has heard of Instagram, and that was kind of a joke because my South by Southwest handler told me I needed to engage the audience. So of course everybody raised their hands, and I said, okay, well yeah, of course everyone's heard of Instagram. So I want to start off by talking about the way that Instagram is changing the way that we interact with our food. So I was having brunch with a friend not too long ago, and I looked over at the booth next to us, and I saw this happening. And so this guy's taking pictures of his food, and that's fine. A lot of us take pictures of our food, but most of us don't get right up in there like this guy was and whip out a big camera to take pictures of food. This guy had a big camera, really big telephoto lens. He's like getting right in there to get the perfect angle of how that fluorescent light glints off of his eggs Benedict. And he started moving around. He was kind of causing a scene. So it was a really strange situation. And I started to get a little frustrated by this guy. I started kind of judging him and thinking like, what the heck? What is wrong with this dude? And I'm not the only person who gets frustrated with people for taking pictures of their food. There are a couple different internet memes where people riff on this. This is one of them. I like this one a little bit more. Describe your lunch to me while I'm having a ham sandwich. McSweeney's even wrote an article about it in an appropriately sort of cynical, sarcastic tone, an open letter to people who take pictures of food with Instagram. So I'm not the only person, and I just wanted to consider why we get so frustrated with people for doing things like this, and what about it? What about this frustrates us? One answer to that could just be that it's a guy who's doing something different than the rest of us do. He's, doing something outside of our social norm, and that kind of threatens us. People in groups get threatened when someone acts outside of their social norm. I think it's bigger than that though, because if this guy had dressed up like a clown or been wearing a funny hat or had a really giant mustache, like it wouldn't have been as annoying as jumping up and doing this. And I think it's, for me, because what he's doing right here represents a silly way to live to me. I mean, I just assume, looking at him and looking at what he's doing, that he's putting this picture of Instagram, he's taking a picture of his food to put on Instagram because he's trying to cultivate a persona of being a refined and artistic and just sort of like well-developed person. And in reality, he's jumping all around and creating this scene trying to take a picture of his food, which is not what I equate with being refined or having a good idea of what it means to live well. It looks like a person who's a little too worried about their image online. Now, before I go any farther, I just want to be fair to this guy. I don't actually know him, and I didn't go up and ask him what he was doing. My kids were running around like making their own scene. So for all I know, this guy's actually like a famous food blogger or, writes in a magazine or does something really important, had a really good reason for it. And while he's taking a picture of his food, I'm like doing the equally strange thing of taking a picture of a guy who's taking a picture of his food. And it just strikes me that none of this would have happened 5 or 6 years ago. You never saw people doing this, which kind of just drives home the point that the things that we use change us. They change the way that we interact with the world. They change the way that we interact with each other. The things that we use, designed things, can change the way we communicate with the people who we love, the people we don't, and ultimately the way we view ourselves. And that's a huge deal. That's a really huge deal. As designers, we're often just thinking about the context of the problem we're trying to solve. We're not thinking about the bigger implications it has on people's lives, on the way they view themselves, on the ways that they live. And so that's what I want to spend some time talking about today. Or here's That's not actually the way I led into this slide. I said something like, it can change the way that we think about other people and view ourselves, and here's why. Here's why it can change. Here's why. Here's how that happens. Something like that. I don't know. It was a really, really graceful transition in the real slide. It turns out that somewhere between 80 to 90% of the decisions that you make are subconscious. They're not, you may think that they're conscious decisions that they're not. And this isn't a surprise to most designers. We know enough psychology to know that a lot of things that we do are subconscious, and marketers especially know this. Some researchers will go as far as to say 95% of the decisions you make are subconscious. Those subconscious decisions are made by networks of emotional perception. So you are making a decision, your brain is making a decision, but it's happening at a level you're just not conscious of. Let's talk about how that happens. So your emotional perceptions, your emotional brain filters a perception. This is the top circle. That perception is surfaced to your rational brain and said like, hey, I would like to eat that plate of eggs. And then your rational sort of conscious brain justifies why you made the decision. That leads to an action. Now we're in the second circle. Taking actions regularly, such as eating those eggs, maybe start eating eggs every morning, turns into a habit. Those habits shape our desires. And the idea that habits shape our desires it has been relatively new to me in the last year. I picked this up first from a guy named Jamie Smith in his book, Desiring the Kingdom. David Brooks also talks about it in his book, Man as a Social Animal. So anyway, your habits create your desires. So the things that we do regularly changes the things that we love or the way that we want to be. Alcoholics Anonymous actually exploits this in the way that they help people get off of their addictions. I think they coined the phrase "fake it until you make it," and this is why "fake it till you make it" works, because doing something over and over will change the way that you emotionally perceive the world via your desires. Desire is a really important thing from a design perspective. A lot of the time we're working to engineer desire because we're trying to design a situation where we need to get a person to do something that maybe they don't normally want to do. This can be a really powerful, really important tool. Obviously, if it's misused, it could be really dangerous as well. But the interesting thing about desire is that it is the flip side of morality. That's not something that we usually talk about, or that's not the way we usually think about morality. For most of us, morality is just a set of rules, right? If you said like, oh, he's really into morals, you think that that's a guy who is going to tell you you should do X, Y, Z, and you should not do A, B, C, and is going to be constantly worried about following the rules to the letter of the law or something like that. That's not really what this word means. That's a very surface level understanding of it. At a deeper level, your morality is just your conception of what it means to live well. It's the way you answer the question, how should I act? How should I live my life? It's your view of what it means to flourish and thrive as a human being, and maybe as a society as well. So it's a really deep, big concept, and everybody has a morality. I have a morality, you have a morality. There's no escaping that. In the past, a lot of our moralities have been handed down to us from, many different institutions, certainly parents, political institutions, but one of the biggest guiding forces in determining the way that a person would conceive of what it meant to live well was religion. And this had a lot of really good effects on society. It obviously got abused sometimes, and there were people who used the ability to change what a person thought about living well to get them to exploit them, and obviously that's terrible. But for the most part, religious people are very intentional about the way that they craft their morality and the morality that they want to spread. They know, or they're consciously focused on the idea that they are crafting a person by the morality that they develop, that the morality they develop is going to change the way a person lives their life and thinks about the world. And so they approach it incredibly intentionally. And when they do it right, they have a lot of care and a lot of reverence and a lot of awe for the responsibility that comes along with it. And so it's interesting to think about that in light of what we do as designers. Because in our postmodern age, especially in the Western world here in the United States and in Europe, We get our morality from many different places these days. It's not just those sort of old school institutions. And while many of us are still religious people, the power of religion over our culture is definitely much weaker than it used to be. And if you look at the amount of press that a new Apple product gets, or Google Glass, or something like that, it's very easy to see that within our subculture, and I think within the culture at large, designers and products have a very big influence in shaping the way people think about what they love and what it means to live well. I've spent more time interacting with my phone than probably anything else in the past 5 years. And so it would be silly to think that that phone hasn't shaped a lot. I know this is a picture of an iPad mini, but that phone hasn't shaped a lot about the way that I live and the things that I love and what I think about communication and how long my text messages should be and whether or not I attach photos to them. These are real physical acts that I take every day, very habitual, that shape what I love and the way that I think about what it means to live well. And the problem with this is that designers are not always as intentional about this as we could be. We're often thinking about the small problems that we're trying to solve, fixing online banking, helping people park their cars downtown, stuff like that. Really good problems to solve, things that are important and worth solving. But everything that a user interacts with has the power to change them. And you, as a designer, bring with you an implicit morality to every project you work on. And if you're not conscious about the way that you use that morality, and if you don't make conscious decisions to expose it or not, you're likely to design things in a haphazard manner and not be as able to control the effect that it has on your user, which can result in some pretty strange things. So today, for the rest of this talk, I want to consider how our moralities impact the things we build and how we can be intentional about the moralities that we spread to our users through the things that we make. So before I go into that, though, you may be thinking, like, this is a little awkward. Talking about morality is kind of strange. It's not something that we do all the time in our culture. Mark Twain understood this. He has this great quote at the beginning of Huck Finn about how he doesn't want anybody to consider the book from a moral perspective because it's awkward, and the people who do this overtly are usually they have an axe to grind. But if you read later in Huck Finn, spoiler alert, the book is about a little boy named Huck Finn and his daring escape with an escaped slave named Jim, and they become very close friends. At the end of the book, Huck feels morally compelled to give Jim up. And he feels like he's going to go to hell if he doesn't, but he decides that sending his friend Jim back into slavery is worse than sending himself to hell, and he would rather go to hell than let Jim go back into slavery. It's an incredibly moral thing, right? And Twain knew that it was hard to talk about moral perspectives overtly, and so he communicated it passionately through his novel instead. He communicated his moral perspective instead. I don't think he would ever have written a long essay on the immorality of slavery. He always wanted to take things at a more subtle approach. And so that's what I want us to do as designers too. I want us to write these kind of novels through the things that we make. But we have to start by considering our morality. We have to start by talking about it for even just a little bit. So I encourage everybody during the rest of this talk to be able to be overt about it and engage in the topic. And then we can go back to just building cool things when we're done. So at this point, now you might be thinking, all right, okay, I'm on board with the topic, but who is this guy anyway? So let me just introduce myself. I have a more professional version of that. My name is RJ Owen, and I'm a product manager and design lead at a company called Conversant in Denver, Colorado. And at Conversant, we help companies systematically align values and some other things. I didn't write this, but basically we work in the space of governance, risk, and compliance, or GRC. Governance means we help companies in the way that they specify their policies or how they specify the appropriate code of conduct in their organization. Risk is kind of obvious and not important to our talk today. And compliance is helping ensure that the policies you set out in governance are being followed and people are acting accordingly. The way that this manifests itself in the world, there's a lot of different ways that companies do this. One of them is through company education, online education. This is an ethics training that a company in Texas has done, and it's just incredibly cheesy. You've got this old Flash game, and you're flying a spaceship, and oh, look at that, prepare for the hyperdrive, Commander. and now you're going to learn about ethics in space or something. I don't even know what's going on in this. Another way that you'll see companies manifest their compliance efforts is through the values. And the values, oftentimes, surprisingly enough, the values come straight from God. And God dictates the values to the C-level executives of the company while they are like up in Aspen skiing and having a little offsite retreat. And then they come back to the company and they say, here are the values. And the values are something like we take responsibility for quality and customer satisfaction and leadership, and we love integrity. They're always the same things, right? And every employee hears them and they walk away thinking, that is the best thing I've ever heard. I'm going to be so much better about my job. No, everyone hears them and thinks like that's just kind of ethereal BS that has nothing to do with my job. And then the executives put them up on posters and they may put them on a website full of text, and everyone ignores them unless they are forced to recite them for some sort of um, what are those things called? I don't remember, ISO 9000 or something like that. If you have to recite the values, you'll memorize them. Otherwise, you ignore them because they have nothing to do with your job. So my perspective, my morality has nothing to do with this. And I believe that this is really not living well. This is the opposite of it. I believe, a little crazily, I agree, I admit, that the glory of God is man fully alive. I'm a little bit of a religious person. And I believe that there is nothing worth living for and nothing worth doing so much as helping people to become more fully alive and more fully engaged in their lives, to live richer, happier, more flourishing lives. And I believe that these kind of corporate values and this kind of ethics training is directly contrary to that. It makes me so frustrated. It has been the worst part of my life in big corporate America. And has stifled me more than anything else I've done. And so my mission in my company is to try to take that stuff down, to present a way that your company can convey its values that has moral resonance, that makes you understand that you're a professional and you deserve to be treated with respect, and that you will, I believe that you will do better work if we treat you with respect and we don't make you jump through these BS hoops with, silly ethics training and stuff like that. So that's why I'm in this field, for very, very moral reasons. That's why I believe in the company that I work for. And so anyway, that's a little bit about me. I'm prone to ramble about this, so I'm not going to keep going. So at this point, you might be asking, all right, fine, man, get to the talk. What does this mean for design? So let's get into that. There are many designers over the history of design who have come up with really great frameworks for designing well. And one of them was a guy named John Ruskin back in the Victorian age. Another one who we're probably more familiar with was Dieter Rams, who did the 10 Commandments of Good Design. And so I've taken their design frameworks specifically. There's lots of others, but those two I thought were really appropriate for this talk. And I've integrated them with a framework that I got from Wendell Berry in a chapter called Solving for Pattern in his book, The Gift of Good Land. Wendell Berry was an American poet and a novelist and an essayist, and he wrote a lot about agriculture. He was a farmer and what it means to farm well and to care for the land and a farm from a moral perspective. And while he wasn't a designer, I think a lot of his framework and a lot of his thoughts apply really well to what we do as digital technologists. So I'm going to integrate those three into 6 principles for moral design that I've come up with. Now, these are by no means exhaustive, and, I'm just one dude. You may have noticed from my picture, I'm a balding white guy with a beard. There are many of us running around, and I hope to continue evolving this. I hope to hear from other people about the way that you guys do this or thoughts you have on moral design, because this is a really big deal and not something that I can just come up with in preparing a talk for South by Southwest. So anyway, with that disclaimer, let's dive into it. My perspective, the first principle of moral design is that moral design is restrained. So Ruskin and Dieter Rams both contain some element of this. Dieter Rams says good design is as little design as possible. And that's really part of the guiding principle behind this, that moral design looks for constraints and looks for restraints on the process. And maybe we ask, are these restraints required? Are they necessary or not? And if they are, We work within them and we work with them. We try to answer the questions, how much is enough and how much is too much, and not continually push that boundary. But what amount of messages per day is healthy for one of my users to receive? Or how many times a day should they check their email? I don't even know, but things like that. Within the concept of restraint, we're thinking about what the healthy limits are for a person's interaction with a system or their involvement with it. And so as a case study for this, I looked at Facebook. Facebook does not really do constraint very well. There's lots of messages and kind of everything's in your face all at once. It's hard to interpret what you should be looking at when or which is most important. And because of that, if you walk through your homepage on Facebook, you start to get the sense that you should be paying attention to everything all the time. And so the moral view that's implicit in this is that all of the things going on around you matter, and you should remember and be engaged with all of them. And that's difficult. That makes people frantic. That gives people anxiety. And so I don't think from a moral perspective this is the best way that we could do a social relationship. Now, I don't mean to criticize Facebook with that. I don't think that they've consciously designed it this way, or they consciously set out to be, quote unquote, immoral. I just think that they weren't intentional about it, and they didn't ask that kind of question when they started. I mean, they were definitely intentional about it, but they weren't intentional about it from a moral perspective and thinking, what view of living well are we promoting through this design? The second principle is that moral design should improve harmony. You should improve the balance of a user's life and the things that they interact with. And the important thing to take away from this is that as designers, we shouldn't solve problems by creating more problems. Trade-offs are definitely a necessary part of being a designer. Sometimes we have to make trade-offs, but I think sometimes we're far more prone to accept trade-offs as the rule rather than the exception. Wendell Berry talks a lot about this in agriculture, that people are sort of prone to make trade-offs in many places where they don't have to. So I think we should focus on being both and people rather than either or, and really think hard about what other problems we might create outside of our system rather than just focusing on the design. This plays into the last principle too, so we'll talk about it more there. But as an example for this, I talked about Instagram. Instagram solved a really real problem with how people share photos and share photos quickly to their friends. And they did it in a really great, elegant way. But I don't think that they intentionally thought about, first, what is this going to do to the way that people interact in social spaces? And so you see things like the guy taking pictures of food with friends. So again, I don't think that this is I don't think that they were ultimately evil or wrong, or I'm not trying to criticize Instagram here because it's obviously an amazing service that's been really successful. But I think if they had intentionally thought about what this would do to the people who used it and the type of social interactions they would encourage, maybe they would have done it a little differently. And you can see an idea of how to do it a little differently in the way that Google Plus works. And it's interesting, Google Plus is taking photos here from Instagram, but they're displaying it in a really restrained and simple way. So contrast this view to what you saw on Facebook as well. And Google Plus is maybe a little under-designed, but they're only showing you a small amount of content at a time to try to make it easier for you to parse out what's going on. And they specifically say that they're trying to make sharing on the web more like sharing in real life. So they're trying to make it simpler. They're trying to make it easier for you to understand. They're trying to not overload you. They focus on these circles, events, and hangouts, which are much simpler, closer to real life interactions. And so I think, again, intentionally or not, I don't know that the Google Plus team sat down and said, what is this going to do for someone's view of what it means to live well? But I think Google Plus does a little better job of promoting harmony between people and harmony between people and technology, and also showing a little more restraint than we saw in the other examples. Third principle, moral design is dynamic. And this is one that I think we actually do really well as a design community. We value the imperfection that comes from crafting real things, and this manifests itself as failing fast and designing iteratively and testing and meeting with users and all of that kind of stuff. The example I pulled for this is Firefox, but just about every piece of software that runs off of the web today works this way, right? We're always improving, we're testing, we're measuring with our users, and so I think we do a really good job at this perspective, but it's a really moral thing. We shouldn't be so focused on perfection that we can never do anything real. John Ruskin calls this the lamp of life, that our design should never be static. He equated perfection with being static and dead. Next, similar to that, moral design requires real craftsmanship. Good things only come from good practices, and good things are only as good as the practices that create them. So as designers, we should reject ends means type of thinking, that there are ends and there are means to those ends, and that those things are separate. And we should see them as an integrated whole, and that to craft good things, we have to have good crafted processes. The example I use for this is Basecamp. If you've used the new Basecamp, you might have your own opinion on the design decisions they made. I've talked to a lot of designers who don't like it for one reason or another, but I don't think that you can argue that it feels really, really crafted and really well crafted, even if you disagree with the thing that they ultimately made. Now, as a user, this gives me a really great sort of moral message. It tells me that I'm worth something that took a lot to make. It helps me believe in craftsmanship in my own life. It makes me want to do more crafted things. It makes me want to make nice things like this. Beautiful things and well-crafted things have a great impact on speaking to people's desires about beauty and about what the value of life. And I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of rambling here, so I'm going to keep going. But really well-crafted things have a moral impact on the people who use them. I guess I will ramble for a second. In the Middle Ages, this is why cathedrals were done so beautifully, is because, again, from a religious perspective, they knew how important beauty was in crafting desire and in creating a sense of awe and inspiration in people. And I think the things that we make today can be as beautiful as those types of things if we'll take the time to craft them well. The last two principles here are probably the most important, so I'm going to spend a little bit more time focused on them. Moral design is honest, so your design shouldn't pretend to be something other than what it really is, and we need to focus on promises that are achievable. So when I say honest and I say promises, that comes from this idea that design is a promise, and I think pretty much every designer I've ever spoken with agrees with this. So we need to ask, what are the promises we're making to people, and are those promises achievable? And will it make people better people? Far too often on the web, we promise things we can't achieve. We release software with these funny, like non-existent business models, and it's really great and it's really fun for people, but it kind of promises you'll be able to use this forever. You should put all of your personal data into it. You should use this as your email client, or you should use this as your social network. And then all of that investment kind of falls apart for that user when your business runs out of money, or when you get acquired by somebody who really needs to make money. So we don't spend enough time thinking about the achievability of our business models and the products. I'm not advocating you get stuck there. I think it's fine to release things that are free, but you need to be open about that with your user. Hey, we don't know what's going to happen to this thing. It's just an idea that we had out there. If it gets enough traction, maybe it'll stay free forever. I don't even know what the right way to market that message is, but I know that it's morally important that we be honest with people and show up front exactly the type of thing that they're getting into or what they're interacting with. And then next, will it make people better people? Is the thing that you're promising something that promotes a view of what it means to live well, that is socially responsible, and that is going to encourage people to become better people? Now, your definitions for those things and mine might differ, but I believe that if we're both intentional about doing it, we'll ultimately produce things that are better on the whole, and we'll all agree that they're better, even if we differ on the specifics. So an example for this, I cited Zynga. Zynga is really easy to pick on in the design community because they've got a negative perception for one reason or another. And I don't want to spend a lot of time doing that because I don't think that the people at Zynga are consciously designing a dishonest system. I don't think that at all. I think that they're just not being intentional enough about what they are designing. So Zynga's promise is that Zynga is the best place to play online games with friends, and it's always free to play. And that's a really good promise. And I've really enjoyed a lot of Zynga games I played. But the thing I started to notice is that they've used playing online games with friends and the promise of freedom to leverage me into micropayments through their games. They get me into the game with their social leverage by getting my friends to play. And then they create an addictive system, a game that purposefully sort of draws you in and keeps making you want more, and then they start charging you money to do anything that's very cool once you get into it. And that doesn't really meet with this promise. This promise isn't the fullness of what I'm getting myself into, and I don't think that that's the morally right way to make a design or to promise someone something. Put this in direct contrast to something like App.net. App.net is an ad-free social network, as you can see here, started by a guy named Dalton Caldwell, and it's made to be an alternative to Facebook and Twitter. It costs money, but that's because their moral perspective is that they should sell products, and they should not sell their users. They should not sell your information. I don't know if App.net will be a successful system in the future, and a lot of people have criticized it for different reasons, but I think that we can all agree that it's a very moral product, and it takes a very honest stance towards telling people up front, like, hey, this is exactly what you're getting into. Here's our business model. Here's how this is going to work forever, and if enough people get on board, then it'll turn into a real thing. And so I really respect that, and I have a lot of, I see a lot of value in that product, regardless of what happens, because of the moral stance they're taking on it. Lastly, moral design is organic. And when I say organic, I don't mean in the context that you can grow it from compost in your backyard. I mean that to design morally, you need to treat the user, the design, the brand, and the environment as a single organism. And that's where the word organic comes from. There is that organism. Wendell Berry talks about this as being the farmer and his farm and the land and the animals on it as being one organism. And I think we can apply that directly to design, in the context of user, brand, environment, and design. That those things, we need to consider them as if they are one organism. I'm not saying they are. I don't think the user should become dependent on the design, or that either of them should become dependent on the brand. I'm saying that when we consider them as an interdependent system, that then we can start to design things that benefits the whole of that system rather than individual pieces of it. Too often we're doing art and promoting our own design, or we're trying to serve the user and we're coming up with bad business models, or we're coming up with models that are going to make the brand or the company a lot of money at the detriment to the design and to the user. And to do these things really well, we have to consider all four of these elements, environment being the context that the user works in, as being codependent, and understand those relationships. And this will allow us to design and focus on designing for virtuous circles. Virtuous circle is sort of the antigen to a downward spiral, right? It's a reinforcing circle that just creates benefits the whole way around. So the user benefits the designer and the brand ultimately benefits the user and their environment. And then we have this cyclical relationship where the four of them are all benefiting each other. These are the types of systems we should be designing for, rather than treating any of these objects in isolation. My example for this is a company called American Giant. Now, American Giant makes sweatshirts and some other clothing, and their perspective is that by making clothing in a really ethical way, by treating their environment really ethically, treating their employees really ethically, and being really upfront with their customers about what they're paying for, they can create better products and make more money. They design their sweatshirts to last for 50 years. So that you'll be able to wear them when you're old. I saw this in an interview. And that has a really moral perspective. That's saying what it means to live well is to intentionally buy things that are going to last for a long time. This promotes a really healthy view of what ownership means. It's in direct contrast to a lot of consumerist mindsets where they'll just, where a business might view a user as a pure consumer, sell them something that's meant to be thrown away or meant to fail. This is in direct contrast to all of that. It's a really elevated view of property and a really elevated view of ownership. And because of that, I love this stuff all the more. I have one of these sweatshirts and it's amazing. It's really comfortable. I love it. And not just because it's authentic and hipster and all that. It's actually just a really, really good sweatshirt. And I love that the company seems to care so much about how they make it and how they and me to make something that good. And I don't think this is just limited to like that kind of hipster or sort of like niche stuff, right? Because it's easy to look at that and just say, oh, that's because you're a designer, you care about that sort of thing. I bet you also shop at Whole Foods, blah, 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 blah. I think the success of the iPhone shows that this is bigger than that. And American Giant's not even really a hipster brand anyway. But the success of the iPhone shows that well-crafted things and things that treat their users and their environment as an interdependent system will win in the long run over cheaply crafted, Boost Mobile, Kyocera, whatever products. People still buy those things, right? There's still a market for them, but I don't think that it's a great market, and it's not a market that I want to be in, and it's not the kind of market that I think um, it's not the right way to serve that market. I think we as designers can create really great, really organic things for people who need cheaper cell phones than the types of things that those companies put out. And we can do it by considering the brand and the user and the environment and the design as being interdependent things in a single organism. So to put my money where my mouth is a little bit, I wanted to show one of the things that we're thinking about at Conversant. This is still a little ways off, but we're thinking about how we're going to change that paradigm around company values so that we're not just showing you that nasty page full of your values. So at first glance, we're trying to, first of all, relate the company values to the company's story. So we encourage the company to write a story about themselves and describe where they've come from and how that company started. Then you can see on the bottom there we have values listed. On the right, we encourage companies to invent something called initiatives. Now, those initiatives are ways that the values are being put into practice. And we encourage users to engage with those initiatives in social ways through their devices, and report on their external involvement on their devices. So maybe your company says it really values sustainability or really values caring for the environment. Well, one initiative could be giving you time off to go plant trees, or if your company values values physical fitness, you could have an initiative to walk 10,000 steps in a week or a month. I don't know the appropriate time frame for that. I'm not a walker. I ride my scooter everywhere or something. Not really. So these initiatives are something that we would report back to a company on, because remember, we're also a risk and compliance platform. So we'd report back to managers and tell them, hey, you have values that have no initiatives against them. These aren't real values. Or you have an initiative on a value that your employees just aren't reacting to. You better rethink whether this is really a value to you, and if it is, how you're going to spread that in your organization. Or even something like, hey, you've promoted values and you've created initiatives, but none of your executives are getting involved. This looks a lot like something where you're just trying to make all the little people at the bottom do it and act like you care, but it doesn't seem like you really care. You'd be doing it. So these are the types of reports we want our system to spit out, and we want to be able to tell people to make values more real and to make people have to be responsible about this stuff and not just throw up some thing on a wall and act like you should be inspired by it. So that's our perspective on that. So again, moral design is restrained, harmonious, dynamic, well-crafted, honest, and organic. And the converse of all these things is immoral design. Immoral design would ignore constraints. We would create problems, more problems than we solve, probably would be the worst of it. Immoral design is static and it's dead. It strives to be perfect, and whether or not it achieves something you might call perfection, it's unable to change and it's unable to grow. It has no character. It ignores the crafted design and is focused on the end product only, and as a result probably comes off cheap. It is dishonest. It promises things it can't fulfill, and it's inorganic. It focuses on only one part of that cycle rather than the entire thing. This is a quote from Wendell Berry. He said, "A good solution, then, must be in harmony with good character, cultural value, and moral law." And again, we might differ on what cultural value, good character, and moral law are, but I think that if we care about this thing, if we care about this stuff, if we take this quote seriously, it's going to change the way that we produce the things that we do. And I think, again, that we will all agree that the things that we produce are better for being mindful of these ideas. So at this point, you might be thinking, what about business people? What about the product part of my department? Those people have a big influence on the things I make. And yeah, I can promote moral design myself all I want, but how do I interface with them? Well, I would just say, first of all, that morality is really in fashion these days. Ethics are a big thing in the world. CH2M Hill won an award this year for being the world's most ethical company, and they're incredibly successful. with everything that happened in the housing market and the subprime mortgage crisis last year, the government cares about ethics more than they ever have in the past. The Frank-Dodd Act means that up to 30% of a government fine against your company will be kickbacks to whistleblowers. So business is heavily incented to make sure that their people care about what's going on in their company and are connected to it. And lastly, management books for the past like 5 or 10 years have been talking about the importance of morality and the importance of ethics and the importance of values. And so this is something that you can really attach to, bring to business people, and they should resonate with it. But, at the end of the day, creating good experiences for people or creating fulfilling is not that different than creating a fulfilling life for someone in well, that's not true, but the way that you interact with business could really be the same. And good UX takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of interaction with business people. And I think that you're probably used to that by now if you're a designer. You know that design has never been just about creating good things or good design. It's also been about integrating with business and integrating with a team. So yeah, it's going to take a lot of buy-in from business. It's going to take a lot of coordination with them, with business and marketing and everyone else in your company. But that's probably what you already do. So stop whining, designers. Just kidding. So in that light, a lot of the things that we produce as designers are directly related to sharing ideas with the rest of the business. So I want to talk about how you can integrate moral design principles into some of the deliverables you make to make better things that go farther with your business folks. So the first one's a journey map. This is a journey map that the company I used to work for, Effective UI, has posted on their blog, and it's about a persona named Sarah and her journey in choosing a broadband provider. So if you've never seen a journey map before, I encourage you to look them up online. But it's a good deliverable for showing what someone is thinking and their emotional experience throughout their engagement with a brand. So here Sarah is trying to choose a broadband provider. We broke that down into different phases, and they talk about what's happening at each phase and how the person feels. So to make this a little more moral, or to integrate a little moral design, I would say that we should take this out longer, and we should show what happens as Sarah continues to engage with the brand or continues to use their service over time. And in the descriptions down below, we should talk about what this does for her life, or how it changes her view of living well, or how it helps her to live well as she continues to engage with the service. And as a thought experiment, you could also take it the other way and show that in the worst case, if our product fails, or the downsides to certain things that you see about your product, what does that do to Sarah? How does that change her life? So look a little bit farther out and put those things into your journey maps. I should say at this point, somebody asked me about this afterwards. All of these deliverables that I'm showing you should be based on really, really deep ethnographic insights. Because we could sit around and come up with ideas on what Sarah's journey should be here, but it's always going to look really positive to the brand. But if instead you go and interview people, work with at least 5 to 7 users, and get their thoughts on, how their current broadband experience goes or stuff like that, it can go a lot farther, and then you can get a much better idea about how to craft these things in a real way. So anyway, that's journey maps. Another one that you might make is a customer's hierarchy of needs. This is, again, something I learned at Effective UI, but you're probably familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you start with someone's physical needs and work all the way up to their really aspirational self-actualization needs. Well, for users in a product, we usually talk about their needs, and then after that, what are their wants, or we call these nice to have sometimes, right? And then their joys. These are the things that really delight users. Another way to frame this might be useful, usable, and desirable. This is one that I hear a lot, and I really like this framework for thinking about the things that we make, but I would change this one to maybe be useful, usable, and fulfilling. If we put a moral spin on it, rather than thinking about what's going to delight our user the most, it might be more morally appropriate to think about what is going to fulfill them the most. What is the most fulfilling view, or what's the thing that best promotes our conception of what it means to live well for this user? How does our brand fulfill that ultimate desire, that ultimate need that they have? And that could get a little esoteric. It might be a little weird, and you might have to throw out half of the things that you come up for that, because they might be too far out there. But I think just asking the question and just going through the process of thinking about it is the most important part, and will have the biggest impact on your designs. And again, this should be based on real research with real people. So the last one I want to talk about is actually this is second to last is just doing a simple cycle diagram and map out those virtuous cycles and the relationships between people and your things. Um, I'm not going to pretend like I invented cycle diagrams because it's very simple, but I haven't seen them used in this sort of context before. So an example could be looking at the fun ethics training situation. So if someone came to you and said, hey, designer, we need to make an ethics training game. I want you to make it fun, make it like it's a game. People like to say, make it like a game. So you might hear that. You could go do some research with people, come up with some concepts, go do some research, put it in front of people, and you might find that the quizzes, games, and other things you've created actually make them feel belittled. And then as a designer, we could anticipate what that belittled feeling is going to result for in the company. It's going to result in a drop of morale, which is ultimately going to lead to people not taking the company seriously and doing things that violate the ethics and the policies even more, which is going to lead to more reports, which is going to lead to a need for more ethics training. And that's tough. That's not what the company wants. So instead, you might do a little research and find that people would much more prefer a simple questionnaire or a face-to-face conversation. So you give them an ethics training handbook, you give them a policy, whatever, and then you have them sit down and talk with you to make sure that they understand it. And then you have them sign something saying that they understand it. I understand that this could be a lot more work than making all of your employees play a little flash game, but it's a lot more humanizing and it's a lot more respectful. It respects them as professionals and it respects their value. And so as a designer, you could anticipate that this will result in fewer employee ethics violations and a smoother life for HR. So you can see by using a diagram like this and showing the effects of the two practices, I, as a person in GRC, am going to use this to try to help sell the idea that we shouldn't promote these, silly flash games, but should really try to change what it means to train employees. So lastly, personas. Personas are the best known, most widely used UX deliverable out there, and that's because they're a great place to integrate everything else. So you can see in this one, I stole this from a blog post on UX Mag that I think I cite at the end. You can integrate lots of other types of deliverables. So I would encourage you to integrate a customer hierarchy of needs in here, a little bit of the journey map, and also some of those cycle diagrams. And then in describing someone, like describing Tina here, talk about what her view of what it means to live well is, and how you're going to promote her flourishing through the interaction with your product or with your service. This is a great place to think big about the way that this person is going to interact with your service and what it's going to do to affect their life. So that's the talk on deliverables. I'm gonna wrap it up here pretty soon. I'm gonna end with another quote from Mark Twain. He says, "Do the right thing. It will gratify some people, and it will astonish the rest." And I think that's really important. Yesterday at a keynote, I know a lot of you guys didn't get to see it, but it was streamed online. You can hear Tina Roth Eisenberg talking about her design process and the things that she made. And she said that she always valued experience over money. And there was something really, really inspiring in what she showed and the way that she said that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't value money, because that would be silly. We all need to make money. Money is a very important part of doing business. But doing the right thing is just as much of an important part. And so thinking about the morality of what we do, the moralities that we encourage in our designs, needs to be up there right along with and encouraging the right kind of a business model that you're gonna make for your company or anything else that you do. Rambling again, but as I said in the beginning, I'm a little bit of a religious person. I'm a little bit crazy, and I believe that design is an almost religious activity with almost religious implications for what it means for people's lives. And to paraphrase Wendell Berry, when you take design responsibly and you consider the moral implications of what it means to be human and what you're going to promote in people's lives, this can be an incredibly sacred and reverential act that has deep, deep meaning and lots of honor. This can be an incredibly significant and incredibly life-giving thing, both for you and the people who use your products and services. But if you do it carelessly, and if you do it recklessly, and if you do it without intentionality, it can be a huge disaster. You can create tons of problems you never anticipated, and it can be a desecration. So please don't. Please take these things seriously. Please be intentional about the way that you engage your users, and think about how the things that you make is going to change or are going to change what they think about what it means to live well. So thanks for bearing with me. That's the end of my talk. I asked everyone to rate it on the South by Southwest app here. I apologize for some of the rambling. It's been a long day. I've been doing a lot of talking. I practiced this about 10 times before I started, so I've given it a lot. Just want to give a shout out to my friend Sarah Pacheco, who helped design my slides and gave a lot of feedback, and everybody else in the design community. Oh, so many people watched the short preview I put out on YouTube and gave me great feedback that guided this post. So thank you all very much. It helped a lot in building the talk. Here's some URLs to these things. I'm going to post these slides up on SlideShare, and that's it. Thanks, everybody.